The cargo ship from Velox Prime docked at way station Keth 7, just after the third rotation cycle. And nobody paid much attention to it at first, because merchant vessels came and went all the time in this forgotten corner of the galaxy. But this ship carried something different. Something that would change everything for one human woman who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. The station itself was old and dirty. A trading post that floated in the darkness between star systems where travelers stopped to refuel and criminals came to hide, and merchants sold whatever they could find. And the lower decks smelled like rust and recycled air and things best left unmentioned. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been working here for 6 months now, studying alien creatures and writing reports that nobody back on Earth would probably ever read. And she had grown used to the strange sights and sounds of this place, where dozens of species mixed together in an uneasy peace. She was walking through the waste disposal sector when she heard the sound. A low moan that was filled with so much pain that it made her stop in her tracks and look around for the source. What she found made her heart break into 1,000 pieces. In a rusted cage near the garbage chutes, there was a creature unlike anything she had seen before, and it was dying. That much was clear from the way it lay on its side, with its chest barely moving and its eyes half closed. The beast was massive, easily the size of an earth tiger, but with 6 powerful legs instead of 4. And its fur might have once been beautiful, a shimmering mix of silver and blue that caught the light. But now it was patched and falling out in clumps, and open sores covered its body. Elena moved closer and the creature opened its eyes, golden orbs that seemed to hold all the sadness in the universe. And it did not growl or bare its teeth. It simply looked at her as if asking why the world had been so cruel. A Grellian security officer noticed her standing there and floated over on his hover platform. His tentacles waving in what Elena had learned was a gesture of dismissal. "Do not waste your time on that thing, human," he said in his bubbling voice. "The Veluxians left it here because it is dying from sketh worms, and there is nothing anyone can do. So we will dispose of it once the paperwork is complete." Elena felt her hands curl into fists at her sides as she asked what sketh worms were. And the Grellian explained that they were parasites that burrowed into the nervous system of their host and slowly ate them from the inside out. And no species in the known galaxy had ever found a cure. The Veluxians paid good credits for this Karath, the officer continued. But now that it is sick, they want nothing to do with it because treatment is impossible and the creature will be dead within a week anyway. So they cut their losses and left. Elena stared at the Korth, at this magnificent beast that had been thrown away like garbage because saving her was too much trouble. And something deep inside her refused to accept this. "What if I take her?" Elena asked, and the Grellian made a sound that she knew was laughter. "You want to take a dying apex predator into your quarters?" he asked with clear disbelief. "Humans truly are as strange as the stories say. But if you want to claim this beast as salvage property, there's your right under Union law. And it saves me the trouble of arranging disposal." Elena signed the forms without hesitation. And within an hour she had arranged for a cargo drone to transport the cage to her quarters on the middeck. And she ignored the stares and whispers from the other station residents who thought she had lost her mind. Her colleague physician Celtos was waiting for her when she arrived, his tall insectoid body blocking the doorway and his antennae twitching with concern. "I heard what you were doing, and I came to talk you out of this madness," he said. "That creature is a Korath, one of the most dangerous predators in 3 sectors. And even healthy, they are nearly impossible to control. But sick and in pain, she could kill you without even meaning to." Elena pushed past him and opened the cage door. And Celtos made a high-pitched sound of alarm as she stepped inside with the dying beast. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Get out of there before she tears you apart." But Zira, for that was the name Elena had seen on the cargo manifest, did not attack, And instead she lifted her massive head just slightly and looked at this strange small creature who had come into her cage. And Elena could see the confusion in those golden eyes, because nobody had shown her kindness in so long that she did not know what to make of it. Elena knelt down slowly and held out her hand. And Zira sniffed it weakly before letting her head fall back to the floor with a sound that was almost a sigh. "I know you are scared," Elena whispered as she gently touched the matted fur on Zira's neck. "I know you are in pain and everyone has given up on you. But I want you to listen to me very carefully." Celtos watched from the doorway, unable to look away from this impossible scene of a human comforting a beast that could bite her in half. "I am not going to let you die here," Elena continued, her voice steady and sure. "I do not care what the others say about this being impossible. And I do not care how hard it is going to be, because you deserve better than to be thrown away like you are nothing." Zira's eyes met hers, and for a moment, something passed between them. An understanding that went beyond words or species or the vast gulf of evolution that separated them. "I'm going to save you," Elena promised. And she meant it with every fiber of her being. "So you need to hold on for me. Can you do that?" The Korath made a small sound, barely more than a breath. But Elena chose to believe it was a yes. Althos shook his head slowly as he watched Elena begin to examine the sick creature, checking her vitals with a handheld scanner and making notes on her datapad. "You humans never know when to give up," he said. And it was not clear if he meant it as criticism or wonder. Elena did not look up from her work as she replied, "No, we do not, and that is exactly why she's going to live." Outside the small quarters, the station continued its endless cycle of commerce and corruption, and nobody else cared about the dying beast in the rusted cage. But inside that room, a human had made a promise. And humans were known throughout the galaxy for keeping their promises no matter what it cost them. The battle to save Zira had begun. Elena did not sleep that first night, and she spent every hour studying everything she could find about skethworms and the creatures they infected. And the more she learned, the more she understood why every other species had given up on finding a cure. The parasites were clever in a way that seemed almost evil, and they entered the body through the skin before traveling to the spine, where they wrapped themselves around the nerve fibers and began to feed. And the pain they caused was said to be beyond description. Every medical database she accessed said the same thing, that once the worms reached the nervous system, there was no way to kill them without also killing the host. And the best anyone could offer was a peaceful death before the suffering became too great. But Elena was not looking at alien databases anymore. And instead, she was searching through files from Earth, from the universities and research centers where humans had spent centuries fighting their own parasitic enemies. She found what she was looking for just as the station lights shifted to indicate morning, and she sat back in a chair with a smile spreading across her tired face. The skethworms were not so different from parasites that had plagued Earth animals for thousands of years. And while alien doctors had looked at the problem and seen something impossible, Elena saw something familiar. She sent a message to her old professor at the University of Snow Paulo, requesting every file they had on antiparasitic treatments for big cats. And then she began to work. Celthos came to check on her later that day and found her surrounded by chemical formulas and medical equipment. And Zira was lying on a pile of blankets that Elena had arranged into a makeshift bed. "You look terrible," the physician observed. "When did you last eat or sleep?" Elena waved away his concern as she adjusted the settings on the station's medical fabricator, a machine that could create almost any compound if you gave it the right instructions. "I think I've found something," she said with excitement in her voice. "There is a drug we use on Earth called ivermectin, and it kills parasites by attacking their nervous systems while leaving the host unharmed. And I have been modifying the formula to work on skethworm biology." Celtos looked at the formulas on her screen and his antennae twitched rapidly, which Elena knew meant he was confused. "This is based on medicine for Earth creatures?" he asked. "How can you possibly think it will work on an alien parasite?" Elena turned to face him with a look of determination that made even the tall insectoid take a step back. "Because life is life," she said simply, "and parasites are parasites. And just because nobody else thought to look at it this way does not mean it will not work." She loaded the fabricator with the base chemicals and started the synthesis process. And within an hour she was holding a vial of pale blue liquid that might save Zira's life, or might do nothing at all. "This is madness," Celto said as Elena prepared the injection. "You are about to give an untested drug to a creature based on nothing but hope and guesswork." Elena knelt beside Zira and stroked her fur gently. And the Korath opened her golden eyes and looked at her human with something that might have been trust. "It is not guesswork," Elena replied. "It is science. Just science that nobody else bothered to try, because they decided it was impossible before they even started." She pressed the injector against Zira's neck and pulled the trigger, and the medicine flowed into the Korath's bloodstream. For a moment nothing happened, and then Zira screamed. The sound was like nothing Elena had ever heard. A roar of pain that shook the walls and made every alarm on the deck start blaring. And the Korath thrashed on her blankets with her claws slashing through the air. Elena did not run, and she did not even step back when one of those massive paws swung toward her and raked across her arm, tearing through her sleeve, and the skin beneath blood flowed from the wound. But Elena ignored it, grabbing a sedative and injecting it into Zira's shoulder. And slowly the Korath's movements became less violent until she lay still once more, breathing hard. But Aleph Celthos was frozen in the doorway, his mandibles hanging open in shock at what he had just witnessed. "You are bleeding," he finally managed to say. "She nearly killed you. And yet you did not even try to protect yourself." Elena was already wrapping her arm with a bandage from her medical kit, her movements calm and practiced despite the pain. "She did not mean to hurt me," Elena explained. "The medicine is working, and it is killing the parasites. But that process is painful," and she lashed out because she was afraid and hurting, not because she wanted to harm me. The physician moved closer, examining the wound with professional interest despite his obvious confusion. "Any other species would have abandoned her after an attack like that," he said. "The Veluxians certainly would have, and even my own people would consider this proof that the creature is too dangerous to save." Elena looked at Zira's sleeping form, at the slight tremor in her muscles that showed the medicine was doing its work, fighting a war against the parasites that were trying to destroy her from within. "That is the difference between humans and everyone else," Elena said quietly. "We do not give up on someone just because they hurt us when they were in pain. And we do not abandon the ones we care about just because saving them is hard." She settled down on the floor next to Zira, one hand resting on the Korath's side so she could feel her breathing. And she prepared herself for the long night ahead. Celthos watched her for a long moment before turning to leave. But he paused at the doorway and spoke without looking back. "I have seen many strange things in my years among the stars," he said, "but I have never seen anything quite like a human who has decided to care about something. And I am beginning to think that your species is far more remarkable than we ever understood." Elena did not respond because she was already focused on her patient, monitoring Zira's vital signs and adjusting her treatment plan based on the readings. And she would not rest until she knew whether her gamble had worked. The hours passed slowly in that small room, and Elena talked to Zira through the night even though she knew the Korath could not understand her words, telling her stories about Earth and about the cats and dogs and horses that humans had loved and protected for thousands of years. She told Zira about how humans had once been weak and small on a dangerous planet, surrounded by predators that should have hunted them to extinction. But instead of running away, they had reached out and made friends with the wolves and the wild cats, turning enemies into allies through patience and kindness. That is what we do, Elena whispered as dawn approached. We find creatures that everyone else fears or ignores, and we love them. And we make them family. Zira's eyes opened briefly, still clouded with pain, but somehow clearer than before. And she made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement before drifting back to sleep. Elena smiled despite her exhaustion, because she knew in that moment that they were going to win the fight. The Parasites had not counted on human stubbornness, and they were about to learn why that was a very big mistake. The days that followed were the hardest of Elena's life, and there were moments when she truly believed that all her efforts would end in failure. And heartbreak, Zora's condition got worse before it got better, just as Elena had feared it would, because killing the Parasites meant her body had to fight on two fronts at once, against the worms themselves and against the poison they released as they died. The Korath developed a fever that burned so hot, Elena could feel the heat radiating from her fur, and she shook with tremors that made the floor vibrate. And there were times when her breathing became so shallow that Elena thought each breath might be the last. Elena barely left the room during those terrible weeks, sleeping in short bursts on the floor beside Zira and eating only when Celtos forced food into her hands. And her entire world shrank down to this one small space and this one magnificent creature who was fighting for her life. She talked constantly, filling the silence with stories and songs and simple nonsense, because she had read somewhere that earth animals recovered faster when they heard familiar voices, and she hoped desperately that the same might be true for a Korath from the other side of the galaxy. Sometimes she played music from her personal collection, the old songs her grandmother used to sing in Portuguese, and Zira's ears would twitch slightly as if she was listening even in her fevered sleep. Words spread through the station about the crazy human and her dying beast, and most of the residents shook their heads and made jokes about how foolish Terrans could be. But not everyone laughed. A young engineer named Tallow began appearing at Elena's door every few days, bringing supplies she had not asked for and asking questions she was too tired to answer. Tallow was a Kethvari, a species that looks something like a praying mantis crossed with a hummingbird, with delicate wings that buzzed softly when she was nervous and large compound eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. I do not understand why you are doing this, Tallow said during one of her visits, watching as Elena gently cleaned the wounds on Zira's body. The Korath cannot pay you, and she cannot help you, and she might still die despite everything you have done. So what is the point? Elena paused in her work and looked at the young engineer with tired eyes that still somehow held warmth. Have you ever had a pet? She asked, and Tallow shook her head in confusion. My people do not keep other creatures, she replied. We see it as a waste of resources to care for something that provides no practical benefit. Elena smiled sadly and returned to her work, dabbing medicine on a particularly nasty sore near Zira's shoulder. On Earth, we have been keeping pets for more than 10,000 years, she explained. Dogs and cats and birds and fish and so many others. And we feed them and shelter them and love them, even though they cannot help us hunt or gather or build. She looked at Zira's face, peaceful now in sleep, despite the battle raging inside her body. We do it because caring for other creatures makes us better, Elena continued. It teaches us patience and compassion and responsibility. And it reminds us that we are not alone in the universe, that other beings have feelings and deserve kindness, just like we do. Tallow was quiet for a long time, her wings buzzing softly as she processed this strange human philosophy. But she hurt you, the engineer finally said, pointing at the bandage still wrapped around Elena's arm. How can you continue to care for something that caused you pain? Elena laughed, though there was little humor in the sound, because the pain was not her fault, she replied. She was scared and suffering, and she struck out blindly. and holding that against her would be like blaming a child for crying when they fall down. And I am not that kind of person. The weeks continued to pass, and Elena fell into a rhythm of medication and monitoring and murmured encouragement. And slowly, so slowly that at first she thought she was imagining it, Zira began to improve. The fever broke on the 19th day, and Elena wept with relief as she watched the temperature readings finally drop to normal levels. The tremors stopped on the 23rd day, and Zira was able to lift her head on her own for the first time since Elena had found here on the 27th day. Zira ate solid food from Elena's hand, chewing weakly but steadily on the nutrient paste that Elena had specially formulated for Korath digestion. And on the 30th day, something magical happened. Elena was sitting beside Zira, reading aloud from a novel about Earth explorers just to fill the silence, when she felt a vibration that was different from the tremors she had grown so familiar with. She stopped reading and looked at Zira, and the Korath was staring back at her with eyes that were clear and bright for the first time. And the vibration was coming from deep in her chest. A rolling rumble that shook the air. Zira was purring. Elena dropped her book and wrapped her arms around the Korath's massive neck, burying her face in the silver-blue fur that was already starting to grow back. And she cried harder than she had cried since she was a child. Zelthos found them like that when he came to check on Elena's progress, and he stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. I ran the latest scans 3 times because I could not believe what I was seeing, he said quietly. The Sketh worms are dying, and at this rate, they will be completely eliminated within another week. He paused, and his antennae drooped in. What Elena had learned was a gesture of humility. You did the impossible, he continued. You cured something that every doctor in the galaxy said could not be cured. And you did it with stubbornness and love and medicine designed for Earth cats. Elena looked up at him, with tears still streaming down her face and a smile that could have lit up the darkest corner of space. It was not impossible, she said. It was just hard, and nobody else was willing to try. Zira's purring grew louder, filling the small room with a sound like distant thunder, and she pressed her massive head against Elena's chest as if she never wanted to let her go. The long night was finally over, and the dawn that followed was more beautiful than either of them had dared to hope. Tallow appeared at the door beside Zelthos, her wings buzzing rapidly with excitement. I told everyone in the engineering bay, she chirped. They all want to come see the human who saved the impossible creature. Elena laughed and shook her head, still holding on to Zira like the Korath might disappear if she let go. Tell them they can visit tomorrow, she said. Right now, I just want to sit here and listen to her purr. And that was exactly what she did. Sitting on the floor of her small quarters with an alien tiger beast in her arms. 2 creatures from opposite ends of the galaxy who had found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. 2 months after Elena had found her dying in a rusted cage, Zira was almost unrecognizable as the same creature. Her fur had grown back thick and lustrous, shimmering with that silver-blue iridescence that made her look like she was wrapped in starlight, and her muscles had filled out until she was every bit the magnificent apex predator that Koraths were meant to be. She was enormous now that she stood at her full height, nearly reaching Elena's shoulder, even when on all 6 of her powerful legs, and her golden eyes were bright and alert and constantly watching her human with an intensity that would have frightened anyone else. But Elena was never afraid, not even for a moment, because she knew that Zira would sooner die than harm the one who had saved her life. The Korath followed Elena everywhere, padding silently through the station corridors like a silver shadow, and the other residents had learned quickly to step aside when they saw them coming. It was not that Zira was aggressive, because she never growled or threatened anyone who kept their distance. But there was something in the way she positioned herself between Elena and strangers that made it very clear what would happen to anyone foolish enough to cause trouble. the station administrator, a Grellian named Vorks, called Elena to his office one morning to discuss what he called the situation. "Your beast is making the merchants nervous," Vorks bubbled from behind his floating desk. "They say it is bad for business to have an apex predator walking the corridors like she owns the station." Elena crossed her arms and Zira sat beside her, perfectly still but radiating a quiet threat that made Vorks' tentacles curl with anxiety. "Zira has not hurt anyone," Elena pointed out. "She has not even threatened anyone, and if the merchants are nervous, that is their problem, not mine." Vorks was about to argue when the door to his office slid open without permission, and 3 Veluxians walked in with the arrogant stride of people who expected everyone to move out of there. Elena recognized their species immediately. The same reptilian traders who had abandoned Zira to die. And she felt her jaw tighten with anger. "There it is," the lead Veluxian hissed, pointing at Zira with one clawed finger. "I told you the reports were true. The Kareth is alive and healthy. And I want it back immediately." His name was Deskor, and he was the captain of the merchant vessel that had dumped Zira at the station all those weeks ago. And now he was looking at the magnificent creature with greed practically dripping from his scales. "The Kareth is mine," Deskor continued. "I paid good credits for it, and I only left it here because it was dying. But now that it has recovered, I am exercising my ownership rights under Union law." Zira's ears flattened against her head, and a low rumble began building in her chest. But Elena placed a calming hand on her neck, and the sound faded to silence. "Actually," Elena said with a coldness that surprised even herself, "Zira is not your property anymore, and she never will be again." She pulled up a document on her datapad and showed it to Vorks, who examined it with his many eyes. "This is a salvage claim," Elena explained. "Your station officer processed it the day I took Zira from that cage you abandoned her in. And under Union law, any property that is willingly discarded can be claimed by whoever finds it." Deskor's scales flushed with anger, and he stepped toward Elena with his claws extended. "That law is for cargo and equipment," he snarled, "not for valuable living property. And I do not care what papers you have, because I will take what is mine, and you cannot stop me." He reached out to grab Elena's arm, his claws digging into her sleeve. And that was the moment he made the biggest mistake of his life. Zira moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move. 600 pounds of muscle and fury, launching forward in a blur of silver and blue. And suddenly she was between Elena and Deskor, with her fangs bared and a sound coming from her throat that was less like a roar and more like the universe itself had decided to be angry. The Veluxian stumbled backwards so fast he fell over his own companions, and all 3 of them scrambled toward the door with pure terror on their reptilian faces. "That beast is dangerous," Deskor screamed as he fled down the corridor. "I will contact the Union authorities and have it destroyed." But he was already gone, and the threat rang hollow even as he shouted. It's Zira stood guard in front of Elena for several long moments before finally relaxing. And when she turned to face her human, there was a question in those golden eyes, as if she was asking whether she had done the right thing. Elena knelt down and wrapped her arms around the Kareth's neck, feeling the powerful muscles still tense with protective instinct. "You did perfect," she whispered. "You kept me safe, just like I kept you safe. And that is what family does." Vorks cleared his throat awkwardly from behind his desk, where he had been pretending to be invisible during the entire confrontation. "For what it is worth," the administrator said, "I have reviewed your salvage claim, and it is completely legal. And the Veluxians have no grounds for ownership. So as far as this station is concerned, the Kareth belongs to you." He paused, and his tentacles waved in what might have been admiration, although I suspect the creature would have made her own feelings clear on the matter, regardless of what the law said. Elena smiled, and scratched behind Zira's ears, making the Korath's purr rumble to life once more. In the old records of Korath behavior came a voice from the doorway, and Elena turned to see Talos standing there with her wings buzzing excitedly. It says that they only bond with those who prove themselves worthy through great sacrifice. The young engineer stepped into the room and looked at Elena and Zira with wonder in her compound eyes. The bond is supposed to be unbreakable. Talo continued, and once a Korath chooses their companion, they will protect them until death, which is why they are so valuable as guard beasts. But the records also say that the bond cannot be forced, and it only happens when both parties truly trust each other. Elena looked at Zira, at this magnificent creature who had nearly died alone and unloved, but was now standing tall and healthy, and utterly devoted to the human who had refused to give up on her. I did not sacrifice anything. Elena said softly, I just cared. That night Elena sat on her bunk with Zira's massive head resting in her lap, and she stroked the silky fur and listened to the thunderous purr and thought about everything that had happened. Since she found a dying beast in a rusted cage, she had come to this station as just another scientist doing just another job, anonymous and unremarkable in a galaxy full of wonders. But now she was something more. She was the human who had saved the impossible creature, and she had found a friend who would walk beside her through whatever adventures the universe had in store. Outside her window, the stars wheeled slowly in their eternal dance. And somewhere out there, Deskor and his crew were fleeing back to Velox Prime with a story nobody would believe. Elena smiled and kept petting Zira until they both fell asleep. The human and the beast who had chosen each other when nobody else would. The universe was very big and very old. But sometimes the most important things happened in the smallest places. And sometimes all it took to change everything was one person who refused to walk away. 1 year had passed since Elena had found Zira dying in a cage on way station Kef 7. And everything had changed for both of them in ways neither could have imagined. Elena had accepted a position aboard the GSV Horizon's Edge, a galactic Union exploration vessel that traveled to uncharted worlds and studied the creatures living there. And of course, Zira had come with her, because the idea of separation was unthinkable for both of them. The ship was massive, carrying over 200 crew members from dozens of different species. And at first, many of them had been nervous about sharing their home with an apex predator, but Zira proved herself within the first month. When a planetary survey team was ambushed by a pack of venomous reptiles on an unexplored jungle world, Elena had been part of that team. And when the creatures attacked, she thought for certain they were all going to die. But then Zira was there, a blur of silver and blue that scattered the predators like leaves in a storm. The Korath stood over the fallen crew members and roared so loud that the sound echoed off the mountains miles away. And the reptiles fled into the jungle and did not return after that day. Nobody questioned why the human had brought her beast aboard. Word of Elena's achievement had spread far beyond the little station where it had happened, and the story of the woman who cured an incurable disease had taken on a life of its own. Scientists from a dozen worlds contacted her asking for details of her treatment, and medical journals published papers about the modified antiparasitic compound she had developed. And slowly the impossible became possible for thousands of other creatures suffering from skethworm infestations. Elena received a message from the Galactic Medical Council informing her that her treatment protocol had been standardized and was now being used in hospitals across 3 sectors. And she cried when she read it because she had never imagined that her desperate experiment in a dirty station room could have such far-reaching effects. But perhaps the strangest consequence of her actions was the way other species had started looking at humans differently. Talo had joined the crew of the Horizon's Edge as a junior engineer. And she told Elena that the story of the human and the Korath had become almost legendary among her people. Everyone is talking about it, Tallow said one evening as they sat in the observation lounge watching stars streak past. They say that humans have a gift for caring about things that everyone else has given up on. And they are starting to bring you their problems. She was right. And in the months that followed, Elena found herself approached by aliens, seeking help with all manner of seemingly hopeless situations. A Grelian merchant asked her advice about a failing ecosystem on his homeworld, where an invasive species was destroying the native vegetation. And Elena spent a week researching Earth solutions to similar problems and developed a plan that eventually worked. A group of Terralian scientists contacted her about a disease affecting their livestock that no one had been able to cure. And Elena recognized similarities to a plague that had once threatened Earth cattle. And her suggestions led to a breakthrough each time someone came to her with an impossible problem. Elena approached it the same way she'd approached Zira's illness, not with the assumption that it could not be solved, but with the determination to try everything until something worked. Zelthos had transferred to the Horizon's Edge as the ship's chief medical officer, and he often observed Elena with the same mixture of confusion and admiration that he had shown on the station. I have been studying human behavior for over a year now, he told Elena one day while they were cataloging specimens from a recent survey. And I still do not fully understand what makes your species so different. Elena looked up from her work and smiled at the tall insectoid physician who had become one of her closest friends. What do you mean? She asked. Zelthos gestured with his antennae, a complex motion that conveyed uncertainty and wonder at the same time. When my people encounter a problem that appears unsolvable, we accept it as a fact of the universe and move on, he explained. And from what I have observed, most species behave similarly. Because resources are limited and energy spent on impossible tasks is energy wasted. He paused and looked at Zira, who was dozing in a patch of artificial sunlight near the window. But humans refuse to accept that anything is impossible. Zelthos continued, and you throw yourselves at problems that would make any rational being despair. And sometimes against all logic you actually succeed. Elena thought about this for a moment before answering. Maybe it is because humans have always been fragile, she said slowly. We are not the strongest or the fastest or the most resilient species. And for most of our history, we were surrounded by creatures that could kill us easily. She walked over to Zira and sat down beside the sleeping Korath, running her fingers through the silver-blue fur. We survived because we never gave up, Elena continued. Because when we faced something terrifying, we did not run away. We figured out how to make it our friend. And when we faced problems that seemed unsolvable, we kept trying until we found a way. Zelthos nodded slowly, his antennae waving in thoughtful agreement. I am beginning to understand why your species has spread so quickly among the stars, he said. It is not because you are superior to other races in any obvious way, but because you simply refuse to accept limitations that everyone else treats as absolute. A chime from the communications console interrupted their conversation, and Elena went to check the message. It was from Earth, from her old university. And as she read it, her eyes widened with surprise and joy. The Galactic Union has established a new research initiative based on my work, she announced. They are calling it the Vasquez Protocol, and it is a program to apply human problem-solving approaches to medical challenges across the galaxy. Zelthos made a sound that Elena had learned was laughter. Of course, they named it after you, he said. You have become something of a symbol, the human who reminded the galaxy that impossible is just another word for not tried yet. That evening, Elena stood on the observation deck with Zira at her side, watching a binary star system spin slowly in the darkness ahead of them. The ship would be entering that system tomorrow to explore the planets orbiting those twin suns. And who knew what wonders or challenges awaited them there? A voice came from behind her, and Elena turned to see Captain Varth approaching. A tall and dignified Peleron, who commanded the horizon's edge with quiet authority. "Dr. Vasquez," the captain said, "I wanted to speak with you before we begin tomorrow's mission." Elena nodded respectfully and waited for her to continue. "I have received reports that there may be a native civilization on the third planet," Voreth explained. "A species that has never made contact with the Union and may not react well to strangers." She looked at Elena with something that might have been hope in her ancient eyes. "If we encounter difficulties, I would like you to be part of the first contact team," the captain said. "Because if there is one thing I have learned from watching you with that creature at your side, it is that humans have a gift for making connections where others see only obstacles." Elena looked at Zira, at this magnificent beast who had once been abandoned and dying but was now her constant companion and protector. And she smiled. "I would be honored, Captain." Varth nodded and walked away. And Elena turned back to the stars, with one hand resting on Zira's warm fur. The caress made a low rumbling sound. Not quite a purr, but something that conveyed contentment and readiness. As if she too was looking forward to whatever challenges awaited them somewhere back on Waste Station Keth 7. A rusted cage still sat in the waste disposal sector where the Veluxians had abandoned their dying property. And sometimes passers-by would stop and look at it and remember the story they had heard. Story of the human who saw a dying beast that everyone else had given up on and refused to walk away. The story of stubbornness and compassion and the bond between species that showed the galaxy what humans were really made of, and somewhere out among the stars, that human and her Korath continued their journey together, ready to face whatever impossible challenges the universe put in their path, because that was what humans did, and that was why the universe needed them.